Hey, my name is Pearson Landry, and as a part of my English 149 class at UNC, I completed an audio essay and podcast on the topic of multitasking. This reflection video unravels the projects themselves, my inspiration behind them, and what exactly I tried to accomplish, and both struggles and learnings I experienced along the way. Before I launched into my audio essay and podcast, I had to conduct some serious research on the topic of multitasking. I must have perused some 30 scientific articles before ultimately applying 10 or so to my essay and podcast. Though I initially resented the idea of conducting so much scholarly research, the topic itself proved to be extremely interesting, so I did not have much trouble at all. I could go into all the findings, but I would hate to spoil the audio essay and podcast, so you have to check those out if you're interested. When I first was exposed to the term audio essay, I was turned off. It sounded unengaging and certainly undesirable to our current generation, but I ultimately found it to be a unique, functional way of conveying information. One aspect I found particularly intriguing was the developing of a script that was chock full of pertinent scholarly information, yet conveying it in such a way that was somewhat conversational. I did not want my reader to be turned off by long, complex sentences and unnecessary jargon. Ideally, I wanted this to be a step down from a formal research paper in the level of sophistication. That way, the reader could stay engaged in high-level information. After developing the script, I recorded it and uploaded it to Audacity. I spliced in pertinent clips from a TED Talk that concerned multitasking. To preserve the conversational feel, I added the TED Talk in such a way to make it feel somewhat conversational. Also, I added some intro, outro, and background instrumental music to give the piece a more serious, if almost suspenseful feel. Overall, I think the product turned out great, and I'm pretty proud of it. Moving on to the podcast now. I had some prior experience creating podcasts, so this was not entirely new to me. However, the podcast I created for a different class was not recorded live, but rather in individual clips and then cropped together in a similar manner to the audio essay. The fact that the podcast was recorded live definitely added some significant challenges. First, I had to be extremely knowledgeable about the subject to avoid any awkward silences. I had a script with a rough outline of how I wanted the podcast to flow, but naturally the conversation went in unplanned directions, so I had to strategically guide the conversation to eliminate awkward moments while also ensuring the correct information was covered. Second, in hindsight, I wish I had done another practice run or two with my partner. Though we did run through the plan ahead of time, not having a firm understanding of where the conversation might go proved to be challenging. Finally, it was difficult to seamlessly weave in so much scientific research into a clip that was supposed to be conversational in nature. The audience would have easily been bored with long quotations or heavy external clips, so I had to try and subtly weave facts and studies into a conversation, which I actually feel I did somewhat successfully. Overall, I think my podcast went well and had an ideal mixture of both lighthearted conversation as well as deeper information on the topic. I thoroughly enjoyed this project. Both the audio essay and the podcast proved to be interesting projects, and completing both in a relatively short time frame left me with some very interesting takeaways. First, I'm glad that we are tasked with the audio essay before the podcast. The audio essay was especially research-driven, and the level of research required for a high-level audio essay made sculpting a conversation around the topic of multitasking much easier. I do not think either project would have been nearly as effective if we had done the podcast before the audio essay. Moreover, as I switched platforms from the audio essay to the podcast, I had to be very intentional on how I wanted information to be conveyed to my audience. Whereas citing specific studies and long quotations in research may have been acceptable in an audio essay, it would have been out of place in the podcast. Thus, I realized I had to be more casual with the way I delivered certain information in the podcast. While they covered the same information, I expect the audio essay to resonate more with a serious, deliberate consumer, while the podcast would appeal to a casual listener due to its conversational nature. Regardless, both types of listeners would garner much information on multitasking. Together, these projects taught me to be adaptable and reminded me of the value of hard work. While recording the podcast, though I could attempt to guide the conversation as I saw fit, ultimately I had to take to what my partner was saying and then try to fit that to my plan for the podcast. Also, personally, Audacity was an extremely stubborn program to work with. For whatever reason, I could never grasp the platform and always seemed to accidentally delete something or be unable to import a clip or something would go wrong. Rather than becoming discouraged, however, I put my nose to the grindstone and kept working, and in the end, I could not be prouder of the result. Well, that just about does it. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video on my reflection of my audio essay and podcast. I hope you maybe managed to take away a nugget of wisdom that you might be able to apply to something in the future. Thanks again.